On Friday, 10 May 1940, at the opening phase of the great offensives that marked a decisive turning point in World War II, Erwin Rommel stood on the western frontier of Germany as commander of the 7th Panzer Division, preparing to lead his men into France. The day began in the early hours of the morning, when columns of armored vehicles rolled forward under heavy cloud, and the sound of engines echoed across the fields and river crossings. This moment marked the beginning of Rommel's rise from respected professional officer to one of the most famous battlefield commanders of World War II, a figure who would later be known around the world as the Desert Fox. His reputation was built not on myth or fiction, but on recorded battlefield performance, operational innovation, and a leadership style that blended audacity with close personal involvement at the front. From the outset of World War II, Rommel distinguished himself through his reliance on speed, surprise, and relentless forward momentum. His division advanced rapidly through the Ardennes, across the Meuse River, and deep into the interior of France, often moving so quickly that higher headquarters struggled to maintain accurate reports of his position. During these days, Rommel demonstrated an approach to command rooted in mobility and opportunistic exploitation, observing the front firsthand and making rapid decisions in response to changing conditions. This operational style helped shape his later campaigns and became a defining feature of his leadership in North Africa, where he gained international recognition and an enduring place in the historical study of the war. On Tuesday, 12 February 1941, during the second year of World War II, Rommel arrived in Tripoli to assume command of the newly formed German Afrika Korps, sent to support Italian forces that had suffered major setbacks in Libya. The heat, sand, and sparse supply infrastructure of the North African desert presented an entirely different environment from the forests and towns of Western Europe, yet Rommel adapted quickly. His first days on African soil were marked by reconnaissance, inspection of defensive positions, and planning for counteroffensive action. He believed that only rapid initiative and constant pressure could reverse the strategic situation, and within weeks he began a series of bold operations that drove British and Commonwealth forces back across Cyrenaica, reshaping the balance of power in the North African theater of World War II. Rommel's early victories in North Africa were characterized by coordinated tank maneuvers, concentrated use of artillery, and surprise flanking movements carried out across wide expanses of open terrain. These operations required not only tactical skill, but also careful attention to logistics, fuel reserves, and the maintenance of armored vehicles in harsh desert conditions. Rommel frequently moved close to the front lines, observing the battlefield through binoculars from forward positions and communicating directly with unit commanders. This forward presence inspired morale among his troops and contributed to his emerging legend as a daring and energetic leader. However, it also created vulnerabilities, as decisions made at high tempo could sometimes outrun available supply resources, a challenge that increasingly shaped the course of the North African campaign during World War II. By June 1942, Rommel's forces had advanced to the approaches of Egypt, achieving one of their most significant successes at the fall of Tobruk. This event shocked Allied leadership and elevated Rommel's international profile. Even within Germany, his fame expanded through news reports and official communications that portrayed him as a highly capable and disciplined commander. Yet historians studying World War II emphasized that his success was not simply a product of personal charisma or heroic imagery.
It rested on a combination of professional training, staff coordination, and the ability to identify tactical opportunities in fluid desert warfare. At the same time, his opponents adapted, strengthened their logistics, and developed improved coordination between armor, infantry, and air power, gradually shifting the strategic balance against him. The turning point came at the first, and more decisively, the second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, where British and Commonwealth forces under General Bernard Montgomery halted and then reversed Rommel's advance. These battles demonstrated the limits imposed by supply shortages, equipment wear, and the cumulative strain of nearly continuous operations across vast distances. Despite tactical resilience and continued defensive skill, Rommel's forces were increasingly outmatched by Allied industrial strength and growing control of air and sea lanes in the Mediterranean. For students of World War II, El Alamein illustrates how even the most capable field commander could not overcome the larger structural dynamics of global warfare, including production capacity, logistics networks, and coalition coordination. After the retreat from Egypt and the subsequent Allied landings in North Africa, Rommel continued to command German and Italian formations across Tunisia, facing mounting pressure from converging Allied forces. His experience during this period revealed the psychological and physical toll of prolonged command in a deteriorating strategic situation. Reports from the time describe his concern for the condition of his soldiers, his frustration with supply constraints, and his increasing awareness that the broader war effort was turning irreversibly against Germany. This stage of his career serves as an important educational reference in World War II history, highlighting the ethical and professional tensions faced by senior officers who recognized the disparity between battlefield realities and political expectations. In early 1944, Rommel was reassigned to command German defenses in Western Europe, where he inspected fortifications along the Atlantic Wall in anticipation of an Allied landing. Here, his approach to leadership again emphasized direct observation, site visits, and frank assessment of vulnerabilities. He urged improvements to coastal defenses, argued for tactical reforms, and warned of the overwhelming strength that Allied forces would bring to any major invasion of France. On Tuesday, 6 June 1944, when Allied armies launched the Normandy landings during one of the decisive moments of World War II, Rommel was away from the front, attending to family matters, yet he returned quickly to assess the unfolding situation, recognizing the scale and significance of the operation.
Rommel's experience in Normandy deepened his belief that Germany could no longer achieve military victory and that continued fighting would bring further destruction to both soldiers and civilians. His correspondence and recorded statements from this period reveal his growing disillusionment with strategic direction at the highest levels of the regime. As the battle in France intensified, he became associated with circles of officers who sought an end to the war through political change, reflecting a complex and controversial dimension of his legacy. This aspect of Rommel's life has been extensively studied by historians of World War II, who examine his evolving attitudes, the constraints he faced, and the ultimate consequences of his decisions. On Sunday, 15 October 1944, Rommel's career and life came to a tragic end after he was implicated in the resistance movement within the German officer corps. Offered a choice between public trial and forced suicide in exchange for protection of his family, he chose to take his own life, an event that shocked many within Germany and later became a subject of profound historical reflection. His death symbolized the collapse of a generation of professional officers whose careers had been drawn into the vast, destructive machinery of World War II. In the decades that followed, scholars, educators, and military historians studied Rommel's life not to create legend or heroism, but to better understand leadership, responsibility, and the moral complexities faced by individuals in positions of command during a global conflict. Today, when Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is examined within educational and historical contexts, he is presented as a figure shaped by both remarkable battlefield skill and the turbulent moral landscape of World War II. His achievements in maneuver warfare, his attention to the welfare of his troops, and his willingness to confront strategic reality are discussed alongside the broader implications of serving within an authoritarian system engaged in aggressive war. Through archival evidence, operational records, and critical scholarship, Rommel's story continues to serve as an analytical case study rather than a romanticized tale, offering students and viewers a deeper, historically grounded understanding of leadership, strategy, and the human dimensions of conflict. In the years immediately following the end of World War II, Rommel's reputation took on a complex and sometimes contradictory character. Former soldiers, Allied officers, and historians began to compile memoirs and analytical accounts that explored his campaigns in North Africa and Europe, often highlighting his professionalism, tactical insight, and willingness to advocate for realistic assessments of the battlefield situation. These early narratives contributed to what later became known as the Rommel legend, an interpretation that portrayed him as a brilliant field commander who operated with a sense of honor distinct from broader political leadership. However, continued academic research gradually encouraged a more nuanced understanding, reminding readers that his role must be viewed within the larger framework of Germany's military system and the wider destructive consequences of World War II. As archival materials, wartime correspondence, and official records became more accessible in the decades that followed, historians undertook a deeper and more critical study of Rommel's life and actions. They examined his career not only through battlefield achievements, but also through institutional relationships, strategic disagreements, and the evolution of his personal outlook as the war progressed. This expanded body of research emphasized that Rommel was both a skilled operational commander and a participant in a conflict defined by vast geopolitical ambition and unprecedented human suffering. In academic discussions and university classrooms, his story began to serve as a case study illustrating how individual leadership could coexist with structural forces far beyond any one commander's control during World War II. Military academies and professional staff colleges continued to study Rommel's campaigns for their instructional value, particularly in areas such as mobile warfare, logistics in extreme environments, command presence, and rapid operational decision-making. Officers in training examined his use of reconnaissance, his emphasis on initiative among subordinate commanders, and his personal practice of leading from forward positions on the battlefield. These lessons were explored not as endorsements of the war itself, but as analytical tools for understanding the interaction between leadership style, organizational capacity, and the unpredictable realities of combat. At the same time, historians increasingly emphasized the ethical and human dimensions of Rommel's career. They studied the conditions faced by soldiers serving under his command, the impact of desert warfare on local populations, and the broader humanitarian consequences of extended campaigns across North Africa and Europe. This approach encouraged reflection on both the technical and moral dimensions of command.
Public memory of Rommel continued to evolve as museums, documentary projects, and historical exhibitions presented his life within the broader narrative of World War II. Rather than focusing solely on personal legend, these presentations placed him within a wider network of military institutions, strategic developments, and historical contexts. Visitors encountered not only accounts of daring maneuvers and dramatic operations, but also discussions of strategic failure, supply shortages, and the gradual recognition among many officers that Germany faced inevitable defeat. Through this balanced approach, Rommel's story functioned as a lens through which audiences could explore the complexities of leadership, responsibility, and historical interpretation. In more recent decades, international scholarship has further expanded the study of Rommel by incorporating perspectives from multiple nations involved in World War II. Researchers from Britain, North Africa, continental Europe, and beyond have contributed to a shared historical conversation that situates Rommel's campaigns within global wartime developments rather than viewing them in isolation. This has allowed for a broader understanding of how his actions affected and were shaped by coalition warfare, intelligence operations, and shifting strategic priorities among all sides in the conflict. Through comparative analysis, historians have highlighted how Rommel's operational approach intersected with, and sometimes diverged from, other leading commanders of the war. The continued examination of Rommel's life also illustrates how history remains an evolving discipline, shaped by new sources, shifting interpretive frameworks, and an ongoing commitment to critical inquiry. Each generation of scholars revisits his career with new questions, asking how leadership should be evaluated in a conflict as vast and complex as World War II, and how personal courage, professional ability, and moral responsibility can coexist within a single historical figure. This sustained inquiry ensures that Rommel is neither reduced to myth nor dismissed without study, but instead understood through careful, evidence-based analysis. By 1943, the momentum of the war had changed dramatically. The North African campaign, once the stage on which Rommel's bold maneuvers had made him a legend, ended in Allied victory with the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia in May 1943. For Rommel himself, the conclusion of this campaign marked a profound turning point. His reputation as the Desert Fox had been built on daring offenses, surprise attacks, and mobile warfare across vast stretches of desert. But now, instead of fighting from a position of initiative, Rommel found himself increasingly assigned to defensive roles as Germany attempted to hold on to shrinking territory. After his return to Europe, Rommel was appointed to command Army Group B in late 1943, with responsibility for fortifying the western defenses along the Atlantic Wall. The day, date, and year that framed his new reality was November 21, 1943, when he officially assumed his position in France. This assignment placed him at the heart of preparations for what German leadership believed was an inevitable Allied invasion of Western Europe. Unlike the sweeping tank advances of North Africa, this phase of Rommel's service required engineering oversight, logistical planning, and defensive strategy across hundreds of kilometers of coastline, stretching from the Netherlands to northern France. Rommel approached this task with the same seriousness and energy that had defined his earlier campaigns. His inspections across the coastline revealed what he believed to be alarming weaknesses. He observed gaps in fortifications, insufficient obstacles along potential landing beaches, and complacency from some officers who expected that any Allied invasion would be slow and predictable. Rommel argued that the Allied landing, when it came, would be massive, rapid, and technologically supported. His experience fighting British and American forces had convinced him that the enemy possessed overwhelming material and air superiority. He warned repeatedly that Germany would not have the luxury of a prolonged counterattack. Instead, he believed that the invasion had to be defeated immediately at the shoreline. This conviction shaped his defensive philosophy he promoted during the months leading up to 1944. Rommel insisted on strengthening beach obstacles, laying extensive minefields, and reinforcing coastal bunkers. He urged that armored divisions be positioned closer to the coast rather than held in reserve farther inland. His reasoning was grounded in his earlier battlefield experience. He had witnessed firsthand how Allied air power could destroy armored forces attempting to maneuver in open terrain. Therefore, he argued, the only chance to blunt the invasion was to engage the assault forces at the very moment they landed, before they could fully organize or deploy. However, within the German High Command, Rommel's views were not universally accepted. There were deep disagreements between him and other senior officers, particularly Field Marshal Gerd Rundstedt and the panzer commanders, who believed armored reserves should remain mobile and centrally controlled for a later counterstroke. This internal tension reflected broader strategic uncertainty and political interference from Adolf Hitler, whose decisions increasingly overrode professional military judgment. Rommel, now more experienced and more aware of the war's deteriorating direction, recognized that Germany's position in World War II was becoming unsustainable.
In spring 1944, Rommel continued to travel extensively throughout France, inspecting fortifications, meeting with local commanders, and personally evaluating defensive readiness. His diaries and surviving correspondence from this period reveal a man who was both dutiful and increasingly concerned. He spoke openly about the overwhelming industrial strength of the United States and the Allies, acknowledging that Germany could no longer match their production capacity or logistical depth. For Rommel, this realization did not translate into surrender or withdrawal, but rather into a sober understanding that the margin for error was rapidly disappearing. By early June 1944, the Atlantic Wall defenses were largely in place, but even Rommel understood that they remained incomplete. On June 5, 1944, he had returned to Germany to visit his family and to speak with Hitler about strategic matters. It was during this absence that the pivotal moment arrived. On June 6, 1944, the day now known globally as D-Day, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history along the beaches of Normandy. The opening hours of that day fundamentally altered the trajectory of World War II and the course of Rommel's life. When Rommel learned of the landings, he immediately rushed back to his headquarters. The reality he faced upon arrival was stark. Allied troops had secured multiple beachheads, and despite fierce German resistance, the combination of naval gunfire support, air dominance, and coordinated ground advances gave the Allies a powerful foothold. Rommel visited frontline areas in the days that followed and was struck by the scale and intensity of the operation. He observed destroyed German positions, burnt-out vehicles, and shattered coastal defenses, visible evidence that his warnings about Allied strength had been justified. Throughout June and July 1944, Rommel remained deeply involved in efforts to stabilize the front and slow the Allied advance. He continued to urge more flexible political decision-making and advocated for negotiation or partial withdrawal to avoid total destruction of the army in France. His assessments grew increasingly candid. He reported directly to Berlin that the situation was militarily hopeless unless drastic strategic changes were made. These dispatches reflected not only his professional judgment, but also his growing disillusionment with Hitler's leadership and the rigid directives that prevented tactical adaptation on the battlefield. It was during this period that Rommel became indirectly connected to opposition elements within the German military and political circles who were contemplating action against Hitler. While historical records do not conclusively prove that Rommel actively participated in planning the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt, documents and post-war testimony suggest that he was aware of discussions regarding the need to remove Hitler from power. His position was complex and grounded in pragmatic calculation rather than ideological rebellion. He believed that Germany's survival required political change, but he also feared the consequences of internal civil conflict or chaotic collapse. On July 17, 1944, Rommel's wartime path took another dramatic turn. While traveling near Livarot in Normandy, his staff car was attacked by Allied aircraft. The vehicle was struck, veered off the road, and crashed. Rommel suffered severe injuries, including skull fractures and head trauma, which forced him to withdraw from frontline command. This event effectively ended his active military role in World War II. During his recovery, he remained under watch, and within weeks the political climate in Germany changed drastically after the failure of the July 20 plot. By October 1944, the suspicion surrounding Rommel's possible connection to the anti-Hitler conspiracy deepened. The German leadership, particularly the Gestapo and senior Nazi officials, sought to assign blame widely. Rommel's prestige, popularity among Germans, and respected status among even enemy soldiers made his situation especially sensitive. On October 14, 1944, 2 officers arrived at his home in Herlingen. They presented him with a grim ultimatum: either face a public trial for treason, which would endanger his family and likely result in their punishment, or accept a forced death and be commemorated as a national hero. Rommel chose to protect his family. On that same day, October 14, 1944, he was driven away from his home and died shortly afterward, officially reported as having succumbed to injuries from his earlier accident. In reality, historical evidence and post-war investigations confirmed that he died by compelled suicide, enforced under the direction of the Nazi regime. His funeral, conducted with full military honors, reflected the public myth maintained by the government, even as the truth remained concealed until after the war. Rommel's life and legacy have since been the subject of extensive historical analysis, scholarly debate, and ethical reflection. In evaluating him within the broader context of World War II, historians emphasize both his undeniable military skill and the moral complexity of his role within the German war effort. He was not a fictional hero or a mythic symbol. He was a real commander operating within the constraints, contradictions, and tragic realities of a global conflict. From a purely military perspective, Rommel's contributions to the evolution of modern warfare are significant. His emphasis on mobility, surprise, and decentralized field initiative influenced post-war armored doctrine in multiple countries. His leadership style, which placed high value on presence near the front and direct communication with troops, earned him loyalty from many under his command. His battlefield decisions, particularly in North Africa, demonstrated tactical creativity and the ability to produce results despite logistical shortages and overwhelming opposition. At the same time, historical accuracy requires acknowledgement of the broader context in which he served. He fought for Nazi Germany, and his campaigns, even when conducted with professionalism, formed part of a wider system of aggression, occupation, and suffering across Europe and North Africa. While he was not directly associated with war crimes in the same manner as many other senior officers, the regime he supported bore responsibility for atrocities and systemic violence on an unprecedented scale. This reality forms an essential part of any educational examination of his life. Rommel's evolving political outlook during the later stages of the war reflects the internal fractures within Germany as military defeat became imminent. His growing criticism of Hitler's strategic decisions and his willingness to entertain the concept of political change demonstrate how deeply the failures of leadership had impacted even highly respected officers. In this sense, Rommel's story provides valuable historical insight into the collapse of military confidence within the German command structure during the final years of World War II.
Today, the study of Rommel is approached not as an exercise in glorification, but as an opportunity for deeper understanding. Scholars, educators, and historians analyze his campaigns to explore themes of leadership, ethical responsibility, strategic adaptation, and the limits of individual agency within authoritarian systems.
His career illustrates how tactical brilliance cannot overcome flawed political direction, and how even highly capable commanders remain bound by the moral and historical consequences of the cause they serve. As we reflect on his final years, from the defenses of France to the tragedy of 1944, Rommel's story stands as a complex and instructive chapter within the broader narrative of World War II. It reminds us that history is rarely composed of simple figures or uncomplicated judgments. Instead, it is shaped by real individuals navigating extraordinary events, their choices influenced by circumstance, loyalty, conviction, and, at times, unavoidable constraint. The historical and educational examination of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's legacy, exploring how his life after death has been interpreted, re-evaluated, and taught within the broader study of World War II. In the immediate aftermath of the war, beginning in 1945 and extending into the late 1940s, Rommel's reputation began to take on a new form, shaped not only by historical research, but also by international politics, post-war narratives, and the emerging divide of the early Cold War era. His image as the Desert Fox, once tied primarily to military achievement, gradually became intertwined with themes of resistance, tragic loyalty, and moral ambivalence. During the early post-war years, Allied and German accounts often emphasized Rommel's reputation as a skilled commander who had demonstrated professionalism and a degree of restraint uncommon in many theaters of the war. British officers who had faced him directly in North Africa, including several senior commanders, spoke respectfully of his conduct and leadership. This perception contributed to the development of what historians later called the Rommel myth, a narrative that portrayed him as an honorable soldier who operated separately from the more extreme and criminal aspects of the Nazi regime. This interpretation served multiple purposes in the political climate of the late 1940s and early 1950s. For the Allies, particularly Britain, it allowed for a symbolic separation between professional German military officers and the ideological leadership of Hitler, which helped support reconciliation during the reconstruction of post-war Europe. For West Germany, Rommel became a figure used to promote the idea of a clean military tradition, which was important during the formation of the new Bundeswehr and the country's integration into Western defense structures. However, as academic historical research expanded throughout the later decades of the 20th century, scholars began to re-evaluate and critically examine this narrative. From the 1960s onward, historians gained access to a wider body of documents, wartime correspondence, military records, and personal testimonies. These sources allowed for a more nuanced and evidence-based understanding of Rommel's role in World War II. Researchers emphasized that while Rommel was not directly involved in many of the atrocities associated with other theaters of war, such as the Eastern Front, he nevertheless served as a senior commander within a regime responsible for widespread aggression, occupation policies, and systemic violence. His early loyalty to Hitler, his acceptance of promotions and honors, and his participation in expansionist military campaigns were re-evaluated as integral parts of the conflict rather than isolated from it. This scholarly reassessment did not seek to erase Rommel's military talent or deny his personal qualities, but instead to place them within a more accurate and comprehensive context. Educational analysis in this period increasingly emphasized that moral responsibility in wartime cannot be separated from political allegiance. Rommel's story, rather than being simplified into a tale of heroism or resistance, began to be taught as a historically complex case study in leadership under authoritarian rule. Students and researchers examining his life learned to view him not only as a tactician or battlefield commander, but also as an individual shaped by the political, ideological, and structural realities of Nazi Germany.
In modern historical education, Rommel is frequently discussed within broader themes such as command ethics, civil-military relations, and the limits of personal influence within centralized power systems. His disagreements with Hitler and his later criticisms of strategic decisions are recognized as genuine, yet they are also considered insufficient to separate him entirely from the system he once supported. This balanced approach allows learners to recognize both his professional competence and the inherent contradictions of his position. Rommel's campaigns in North Africa, particularly between 1941 and 1942, continue to serve as important subjects in military history courses and academic research. These campaigns are studied not as romanticized desert battles, but as complex operations shaped by logistics, terrain, weather, supply lines, and international coordination between Axis and Allied forces. Historians emphasize how Rommel's bold maneuver warfare was often constrained by fuel shortages, extended supply routes across the Mediterranean, and increasing Allied air superiority. Understanding these realities helps illustrate one of the central principles of World War II military history, that strategic outcomes depend not only on leadership and tactical decisions, but also on industrial capacity, transportation networks, and economic resources. Rommel's later work along the Atlantic Wall is also a frequent focus of historical analysis. His insistence on reinforcing beach defenses, his warnings about Allied capabilities, and his emphasis on immediate counteraction at the shoreline are evaluated today as examples of forward-looking military planning based on the realities of evolving warfare. Yet, his inability to fully implement these strategies due to internal disagreement within the German High Command and political intervention by Hitler demonstrates how strategic effectiveness can be undermined by fragmented decision-making and centralized control structures. This tension between professional military judgment and authoritarian leadership remains a key educational lesson derived from his experience. In contemporary discussion of World War II, Rommel's forced death in October 1944 is often used as an entry point into the study of resistance and opposition within Germany during the final phase of the war. While historians remain cautious in characterizing him as a member of the organized resistance, his association with individuals critical of Hitler, along with his increasing doubts about the direction of the war, illustrate the growing internal fractures of the regime. His fate, compelled suicide under threat to his family, underscores the extent to which Nazi political power had extended into military institutions, eliminating dissent through coercion and fear. Today, Rommel's legacy is approached with critical reflection rather than unqualified admiration. Museums, historical institutions, and academic publications present his story as part of a broader narrative that seeks to understand the complexities of wartime leadership, the responsibilities of command, and the ethical challenges faced by individuals in positions of authority. His strengths as a strategist, his personal courage in the field, and his leadership qualities are acknowledged. At the same time, they are examined alongside the moral and historical implications of his service within a destructive and aggressive regime. Through this balanced and reality-based approach, the study of Erwin Rommel continues to serve an educational purpose within the wider history of World War II. His life, from the early campaigns of North Africa through the defenses of France to his tragic end in 1944, offers a lens through which to explore broader historical themes, including loyalty, power, responsibility, leadership, and the complex relationship between individual actions and political systems.